But first, 50 days in today into Victoria's current outbreak and what Daniel Andrews promised when he locked down the state, which would be a short, sharp 7-day lockdown. And today, Victoria's recorded 766 new COVID cases, the state's highest ever daily record since the pandemic began. Remember, this was the lockdown that was going to show those incompetents in New South Wales how it was done. This was going to be Daniel Andrews demonstrating that he would be the one government leader in the world who could tame Delta. And it hasn't worked out like that, has it? Indeed, despite locking down harder and faster, Victoria is worse off than New South Wales across almost every statistical measure. Now, it's day 50 today in Victoria, 50 days into the outbreak. And 50 days since the start of this outbreak, Victoria's clocked 766 cases, as I said. Now, in comparison, if you look at day 50 in New South Wales, so the first 50 days of the New South Wales outbreak, their numbers were in the 200s. 200s. That's 300 plus cases more in Victoria than in New South Wales at the same point of the outbreak, even though Andrews locked down almost immediately. Look at the testing numbers out today as well. 62,000 tests in Victoria, 139,000 tests in New South Wales. When pushed on this point today, the Premier blamed the bigger population in New South Wales.
New South Wales is bigger than us, right? They're a bigger state than us.
Now, sure, there's 8.1 million people in New South Wales and 6.6 million in Victoria, but testing numbers in New South Wales are more than double testing numbers in Victoria. The populations are not double. It's not double in New South Wales compared to Victoria, Dan, and nothing like it. This is all spin at 11 a.m, isn't it? Plenty of questions asked, but no real answers. Lots of, I'll get back to you on that one when he doesn't like it, or a bald-faced lie if he thinks he can get away with it.
I think April last year that former Minister Makakos announced 4,000 extra beds would be coming online. Do you know how many have been delivered since then?
No, hang on a minute. Hang on. That is not what she announced.
Good morning and thank you, Premier. So this package will pay for the biggest expansion of Victoria's intensive care capacity in Victoria's history. We currently have about 450, about 500 intensive care beds in Victoria, and now we're going to fund another 4,000 intensive care beds, taking us to a total of 4,500.
Forget the Premier's spin from Monday. There it was, caught on camera, April last year. 4,000 new ICU beds were promised. And where are they today? Nobody knows. But it's a cost that Victorian taxpayers are paying. Over $1 billion was promised. Truth be told, the Victorian government is far better at locking people up than actually running a health system. That's why it's their first response, lockdowns. Indeed, that's because it's their only response. Victoria is so deficient in testing and tracing and vaccinating that lockdowns have to be the first response. Take the hundreds of Victorians camped in border towns, banned from returning to their homes since June. Today, the Premier said they could come back in a week's time if they've been double jabbed, if they test negative before crossing the border, and even then, he'll still force them to quarantine at home for a fortnight. These are people who were on holiday when these snap lockdowns occurred, families and grey nomads. It's just cruelty dressed up as health policy, but with Andrews, all the pain is either absolutely necessary because of health advice that's never ever published, or it's someone else's fault. Today, as a smokescreen for his failure, the Premier spent a good part of the media conference complaining about the Commonwealth not supposedly supporting Victorian businesses to the same extent that it had supported them in New South Wales.
The notion that you would support businesses in Sydney because they're shut down, but you wouldn't support exactly the same businesses in exactly the same circumstances in Melbourne, it doesn't really make any sense to me. So I'm a bit disappointed with that. I'll be raising that with the Prime Minister when he gets back, but I was disappointed to see those comments yesterday. And I would just say to Mr Frydenberg, every time, I think Victorians are getting sick and tired of every time the Commonwealth Government spends $1 in Victoria, it's treated like it's foreign aid, like we should bow our head and be grateful.
It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And when he was picked up about it by the Australian newspaper's Rachel Baxendale, he then admitted he wasn't actually privy to the detail, that this was the Treasurer's working it all out.
I couldn't tell you. I can try and come back to you. I know the treasurers have spoken. I've not had a conversation with Mr. Frydenberg or anything, or anyone.
So why make the claim in the first place? I'll tell you why. It's political media management 101. Get up a line to distract on a bad day, play the parochial state versus state card or the state versus Canberra one. Don't tell the TV news programs. Don't give them the headline that the cases in Victoria today are a record, even higher than last year in the second wave. Oh, give them a "we was robbed" story instead. Now, I don't know why the media in the room let him get away with it. On business support, here are the facts. In per capita terms, the federal government has jointly funded more support to Victorian businesses than any other state or territory, including New South Wales. Fact. Since the 1st of July this year, there's been almost $4 billion in direct support paid by the federal government to Victorian businesses and families. Fact. Did construction companies in New South Wales get support during lockdowns? Yes, they did. But that's because New South Wales put them in their compensation scheme and Victoria chose not to do that. That's another fact. Funny how the Premier left that bit out, isn't it? And when New South Wales increased the eligibility thresholds to give support to more businesses on the 28th of August, that extension was paid in full by the New South Wales government. Meaning if the Victorian Premier was more upfront today, he would have admitted there's nothing stopping his government from paying to support shut down construction businesses, as the Berejiklian government similarly did and went it alone. But Daniel Andrews doesn't care much about the truth. All that matters to him is getting the lines up for the evening news, and he then relies on media's amnesia to get away with it. That's his style to a T. Make the self-serving claim even though you know it's false, and on those rare occasions when you're challenged, say it's really an issue for someone else, or that you'll come back with an answer on that one, even though you really do. As I say, this emperor has no clothes. This week, even rank and file unionists seem to agree.